Believe it or not, wrestling is everywhere. From a superhero's first fight in the ring to a movie star whose name never left it. From cartoons packed with pile drivers to ancient myths testing mortal strength. From music stages echoing its flair to divine conflict that transforms faith. Believe it when I say, wrestling is everywhere. In this episode of Medley, we're not just talking about any kind of wrestling. We're talking about Lucha Libre. Some might mistake it as just the Spanish word for wrestling, but to reduce it to a translation would be a disservice to the legacy, spectacle, and the cultural foundation that is Lucha Libre. So to make sure we do this right, we need to understand the context in which Lucha Libre was able to take root. In the 1930s, Mexico was in a period of rebuilding and redefining itself. Though the revolution had ended in 1920, it had left lasting impacts on nearly every part of the nation. Its politics, its economy, its identity, and its people. In addition to its own hardships, Mexico, like much of the world, was feeling the weight of the Great Depression. It was at this crossroads that the entertainment industry became a vital outlet for ordinary people, providing a brief distraction and a moment of relief from daily life. Radio was a powerful new force. Stations like XCW in Mexico City reached millions, broadcasting music, news, and serialized dramas. Along the northern border, powerful and unregulated Mexican stations, known as border blasters, transmitted with enormous range, influencing audiences on both sides and helping shape Mexican pop culture. Music thrived in all corners of life, from mariachi bands performing at presidential events to son jarocho echoing in Veracruz. These traditional styles adapted and grew, telling stories of love, struggle, and national pride. During the Cárdenas administration, the government actively subsidized mariachi music as a part of a broader effort to promote Mexican culture and unity. Traveling carpas, tent shows in working-class neighborhoods, offered much more than simple entertainment. Blending comedy, music, and satire, they became spaces where performers could speak truths wrapped in humor, often using political doublespeak to critique authority and social issues under the watchful eye of censorship. Stars like Cantinflas honed their craft in these tents, connecting deeply with everyday people through wit and resilience. Boxing, which had been banned in Mexico at the turn of the century, had become one of the nation's most celebrated sports. Initially viewed as too violent or disorderly, it was later embraced by the government as a tool for promoting discipline, strength, and national prestige. Arenas filled with spectators eager to watch fighters from working-class barrios rise through the ranks. Among them was Kid Azteca from Tepito, who would later go on to fight for 4 decades. To many, he wasn't just a welterweight champion, he embodied the grit and determination of the working class, fighting not only opponents, but for recognition, pride, and upward mobility.
Y aquí tienen ustedes a una de las más grandes glorias del box mexicano, al señor Don Luis de la Villanueva, el inconmensurable y único Kid Azteca.
On street corners and newsstands, pulp magazines and comic books surged in popularity, with titles like Paquin and Pepin becoming staples. Offering consistent entertainment with familiar values and recognizable characters, there was something easy to pick up, follow, and pass around in a time when distractions were few and life was uncertain. And cinema quickly became a cornerstone of Mexican pop culture. Audiences flocked to see Hollywood imports, melodramas, comedies, and horror films like Dracula, which introduced supernatural themes that captured the national imagination. But these stories weren't just imported, they were adapted and integrated into Mexican culture, blending foreign legends with familiar folklore. With government interest in cultural development, this decade also marked the dawn of Mexico's golden age of cinema, with films reflecting the country's social realities, humor, and identity with growing confidence. Altogether, these forms of entertainment were embraced by Mexico, as beyond their surface, they were a reflection of its people. Becoming a part of the everyday experience, they offered mediums for people to, often without realizing it, process the profound changes and challenges Mexico and they had endured. Did you get all that? Because we're just getting started. Similarly to Mexico's history, Lucha Libre's story began in a perfect storm. Many attribute Salvador Luderoth as the father of Lucha Libre. But to truly grasp the story, we need to go back into the 19th century to discuss Greco-Roman wrestling. Despite its name, Greco-Roman wrestling was more commonly known as French or flat hand wrestling. Jean Exprayat, a soldier from Napoleon's army, is generally credited for the basic rules of his style of wrestling as he traveled around the European countryside to wrestle at fairs and festivals. Exprayat referred to his style of wrestling as flat hand, to differentiate it from the other strongman contests popular at the fairs, which allowed for striking with clenched fists. It was an Italian wrestler, Basilio Bartoletti, who first coined the term Greco-Roman to reflect the renewed interest in the values of antiquity, with it being the first style entered in the modern Olympic Games in Athens, 1896. Although vital, I stand to argue that neither of these two can claim the title of grandfather of Lucha Libre. That right is reserved for the strongest man in Mexico, Enrique Ugartechea. Ugartechea was born in Jalapa, Veracruz on July 29, 1881, later moving to Mexico City with his parents José Ugartechea and Luz Lazarín. In 1894, at around 13 years old, Ugartechea went out on Mexico City's circus night to watch Ricardo Bell perform in the Circo Orin. Though accompanied by Los Hermanos Cornaya and El Gracioso Banac, nothing quite caught Ugartechea's attention like the Herculean feats performed by Cosimo Molino, better known as Romulus. In 1903, at 21 years old, Ugartechea traveled from Veracruz to Mexico City to challenge the Sicilian wrestler Romulus for the Campeonato de Mexico. For weeks, Romulus brushed Ugartechea off and insulted his lack of reputation, demanding 1,000 pesos to put his title on the line. In addition to raising the lump sum, Ugartechea defended his honor against the claims of his supposed lack of reputation and provided newspapers with his official event permit from the Municipal Council of Tacubaya, and declared his godfather to be the young boxer from Oaxaca, Salvador Esperón. After a heavy downpour the Sunday afternoon of June 27, 1903, crowds began to fill the stands of the bull ring in Chapultepec Park. From the start of the fight, observers from the national paper El País noticed that despite Ugartechea's Herculean musculature, he was an amateur in the art of Greco-Roman wrestling. Though defeated, the audience cheered him as Romulus left the ring under an umbrella and a downpour of booing and trash. By mid-1904, Ugartechea's impression on the public as a modern athlete got him a contract to travel with the Mexican delegation to the St. Louis World's Fair, where he was scheduled to take on an American wrestler. This trip across the border marked the first of many, and he would return to Mexico City after nearly a year of being away. With new knowledge, exotic bodybuilding equipment, and the backing of media outlets, Ugartechea was able to sidestep the law by staging sporadic boxing and wrestling exhibitions, grudgingly permitted only if they served some greater good such as charities for earthquake victims or benefits for foreigners residing in Mexico. In the final years of the Porfirio Diaz presidency, prize fighting and wrestling gained acceptance in Mexico throughout civic activism, changing social norms, and growing media interest. Mexican athletes like Ugartechea and Esperón helped shift the narrative from foreign brutality to national pride, eventually earning support from the military, educators, and entrepreneurs to promote a distinctly Mexican form of physical culture. Here, Salvador Ludwig enters the picture. After serving as an officer during the Revolutionary War, his work as a property inspector took him to the US-Mexico border, where he encountered professional wrestling in El Paso. The mix of athleticism, showmanship, and crowd energy left a lasting impression, one that ultimately led him to establish the Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre in 1933. We've covered a lot of ground, so who better to bring it all together than the one and only? Despite the name that literally translates to the saint, El Santo began his Lucha Libre career as a villain, what is referred to as a brudo. Making his debut in the Arena Mexico on July 26, 1942, El Santo faced 7 other men in a battle royale, where in the end he lost to a disqualification for beating up the referee. The following week, El Santo rematched his final opponent, Ciclón Velo. He won, then promptly lost again for attacking Velos after the bout. Usually, brudos try to give as little effort as possible to claim their victories, but El Santo was different. El Santo was infamous for being aggressive and hurting his opponents. Though he wasn't loved by Lucha Libre fans, they definitely knew his name. Over the next few years, El Santo would go on to win and lose both the Mexican National Welterweight and Middleweight Championships, suffer major injuries in a car accident, and join a few tag teams, where he'd ultimately stay in La Pareja Atómica. But in 1946, El Santo faced Bulgarian wrestler Pete Pankov in the final match for the National Wrestling Alliance's World Welterweight Championship, where he put Pankov into a Boston crab hold and forced him to submit. The stadium filled with the sound of the crowd chanting his name. By representing Mexico in this match and becoming a world champion, he was quickly regarded as a national hero. Despite his prestige, El Santo kept up his rudo behavior over the following years, and was still viewed as a national treasure. It wasn't until 1952 that the public would see a new side of El Santo, a graphic one, when Jose Guadalupe Cruz would begin to release his weekly comic book, Santo, portraying the luchador as a crime fighter for the next 6 years. By this point, if you hadn't followed El Santo in the ring or in the comics, you would surely be seeing him now, as he was cast immediately by film producers looking to capitalize on Lucha Libre, marking the beginning of the Cine de Luchadores. Here, El Santo would reach a new level of recognition in Mexican pop culture. It was usual that upon a rudo being loved by audiences that they would face a difficult transition in becoming técnico. But Santo didn't have this problem. His transition from rudo to técnico would be seamless. In contrast to the notable films of Mexico's golden era of cinema, where the leading men were often hardened ranchers or mariachis full of bravado, alcohol, and entitlement, El Santo was clean-cut. Unshakably moral, loyal, and incorruptible, he didn't brood, he didn't seduce, and he didn't drink away his pain. The kind of man with no vices and a clear sense of justice. He would be put up against monsters that mirrored the anxieties of a changing Mexico. Vampires, werewolves, mummies, mad scientists, and foreign threats. These creatures weren't just horror tropes. They symbolized the unknown, the disruptive, the foreign, or even the repressed. And in each case, El Santo stood as a calm, composed force of order. Not with brute rage or emotional torment, but with discipline, loyalty, and an unwavering moral compass. El Santo had no silver lining. He was purely silver. El Santo made a lasting impact on Lucha Libre and pop culture, but the influence of Lucha Libre didn't stop with him. Even before teaming with El Santo, another luchador was shaping the foundation of the sport. Known for his sharp technical mastery, precision, and relentless drive to innovate, Gory Guerrero's legacy would reach far beyond Mexico. If the last name Guerrero rings a bell, it's because he's the father of WWE Hall of Famer Eddie Guerrero. El Santo also had a son who went on to wrestle under the name El Hijo del Santo. El Hijo del Santo and Eddie Guerrero joined forces early in their careers, but ultimately would go on to clash in classic matches that showcase the legacy of their family. Eddie carried that legacy into new arenas, founding the Latino World Order, a bold statement of pride, identity, and representation in mainstream American wrestling. Through the LWO, Eddie helped carve out a space for Latino voices in a system that rarely handed them the mic. When Eddie was away from the ring, recovering from major injuries sustained in a car crash, the LWO quietly fell apart. Yet, the only one who never left was Rey Mysterio, who remained loyal to Eddie's vision. Rey Mysterio also comes from a proud wrestling family. His uncle, Rey Mysterio Sr., was a respected luchador and trainer who helped shape his son, El Hijo de Rey Mysterio, and his nephew's high-flying style and philosophy in the ring. Such a philosophy continues to project into new generations, shaping stars like Kofi Kingston, Ricochet, Penta, Rhea Ripley, and his own son, Dominic Mysterio, who carries the name forward as his own. Another luchador who has left a lasting impression is Padre Sergio Gutiérrez Benítez, otherwise known as Fray Tormenta. Before ever joining the clergy or entering the ring, Sergio was an addict and a drunk. Seeking to get clean, he visited a church in his neighborhood and went into the confessional. The priest rebuked Sergio and kicked him back out onto the street, as he claimed, "This isn't a rehab center." Eventually being ordained as a priest and setting up a shelter in 1976, the helping hand he never had, Padre Benítez realized that he was going to need money to continue supporting orphans. He remembered a movie he had seen when he was younger, El Señor Tormenta, where a priest becomes a wrestler to support his orphanage. And so, he donned the mask. Fray Tormenta's acts have inspired characters such as Crasher Wake from Pokemon, King from Tekken, and Leon from F-Zero. But most recognizably, the Nickelodeon 2006 hit summer film, Lucha Libre. Video games aren't the only thing tying Lucha Libre to Japan either. Japan had its own pro wrestling scene emerge around the 50s and 60s alongside Lucha. Mexican luchador Mil Máscaras toured Japan and blew audiences away, often being credited as the bridge between Lucha Libre and Japanese wrestling. Now, wrestlers like Hiromu Takahashi and El Desperado show off their lucha inspiration overseas. The role of the luchador is not to win, but to go exactly through the motions which are expected of them. When a luchador dons the mask, their identity takes a step back, and the mask uses them as a vessel, becoming something larger than themselves. A myth, a message, a mirror of the people. Without a face to a name, they can be anyone. But more importantly, anyone can be the luchador. The audience can see themselves, their hopes, fears, and struggles played out in the ring before them. The power of the mask is in its ability to carry forward the spirit of the people. Unlike the heroes frozen on the big screen or ancient myth, these masked figures live among us. They bleed, they age, they lose, only to return reborn in a new body, a new voice, and a new mask. Each fall, a ritual death. Each comeback, resurrection. The luchador does not exist to win, but to endure. To fall, rise, and fight again. And in watching, we're reminded that this mask could very easily be our own. Because as long as there are stories to tell and people still believe in them, the mask will endure. They will endure, and we will endure. Because everybody is a luchador. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medley. This topic really meant a lot to me, so I hope I did it justice. I'm It Scrapes, and welcome to the Grapevine.